Hello and welcome to a special edition of the program, What Does It Feel Like Being You Today? On Radio 94.1 FM 3WBC. Coming to you with thanks to the traditional owners of the land upon which we are broadcasting here at Box Hill, the Wurundjeri Wurrung people, and we pay our respects to their leaders and elders, past, present and emerging. I'm Steve Carey, your guest interviewer today. The reason I'm in the chair will become apparent momentarily. But first, a question. How well do you know someone you call a friend? I ask because when I agreed to host today's program, I had some research to do on someone I thought I knew pretty well. But the further I dug, the deeper I researched, the more I realised today's individual has far more to her than I ever imagined. Among her many talents, she's a globe-trotting expert on men's health, counsellor, MC, keynote speaker, broadcaster, board member, mum, grandmother, and accomplished business person. Her entire CV and early life is extraordinary. From the bush to the city, working across banking, broadcasting, PR, marketing, and recruitment, leaving home early, having a child while still studying at uni, fighting some personal, mental, and physical health demons along the way, including alcohol. It's a truly extraordinary life. And to add to that, she's a newly minted OAM, Australia Day recipient. It is my very great pleasure to peel back a few layers of the person I'm glad and honoured to call friend, Rae Bonney. Rae, welcome to the program you actually founded, and huge congratulations on that OAM. So let's ask the obvious question, what does it feel like being you today?
I've got no idea. No idea what I'm feeling when I'm listening to that. I don't think anyone has ever articulated me or my trajectory in such a comprehensive way. So thank you in anticipation of what is to come.
Well, let's start at the most recent. Was the OAM a surprise? How did it come about?
It was a surprise. I was overseas last year, and for those that listen to the show and know me, there was a very significant event during that time when my whole house was robbed and lost a few things along the way. So when I got back, I was a bit distracted, putting life back together and getting back on track. And that was in October. In November, I had a call from the Attorney General's office, a missed call. Mm. And I thought, wonder what that's about. So I rang back and they said, we've been trying to be in contact with you since July about accepting your Order of Australia medal. And I said, okay, who am I nominating? And they said, it's you. And I said, no. Who am I nominating? And they said, it is you. So it took me a little convincing to actually say, okay, yes, I accept. But between November and January, I haven't told anyone this, but I actually rang them back in early January to say, are you sure?
I don't think they'd get too many people doing that, right?
No. And she said, yes, you're on the list. It is you. It's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, a lot of disbelief, but so much gratitude for whoever nominated me. I do understand from referees who told me they had chimed in. It's been a 2-year process. And for that, I'm just enormously proud of what the award represents, and that is a recognition of the men's health space that doesn't get any recognition. So it's just it's a big thing for the sector. Yeah. And for me,
well, that's what I was going to say. How will you use the award recognition and the extra status and platform it provides?
Well, it's interesting, Steve. Since the award, I've had numerous letters in the mail, certificates, all gold-plated, from lots of different politicians in the area congratulating me. Personally, like handwritten. I was really, really surprised. So, number one, I've compiled all of those letters, and I will be doing a little bit of a campaign, probably closer to Men's Health Week, to say, hey, can you please give us some money, especially around things like funding research projects into men's issues such as violence against men, domestic violence against men, sexual assault towards boys, stuff that we don't really have much in the can about, that we can start really developing some policy.
Yeah, well, I've got to say, from my point of view, picking up the paper that day and scrolling down and seeing Ms. Rae Bonney, Blackburn, South Victoria, for service to community mental health. I mean, it was a huge buzz. And, those that don't know of your work as much, you're a leader in men's and boys' mental health. You're often working in high risk, heavy industry organisations where men can find it difficult to get help. How tough is it out there? For men? For how hard is it? Because we hear a lot about women's advocacy, and sometimes it feels, having worked in media for a long time, that we know it's there, but we don't talk about it a lot.
No, and I can only speak on behalf of the men that I work with, and fortunately men allow me and give me the absolute privilege of working closely with them, allowing them space to tell me things that they probably haven't ever told anybody. And I just touched on it briefly then when we were talking about the OAM and how it might be used in raising some of these issues. It's really tough in that there aren't pathways for men to be able to speak confidently about their experience.
What kind of pathways do you mean?
So just say I mentioned things like, boys who've experienced sexual assault. Nothing. So as boys, there is no pathways. There's a lot of shame and guilt attached to that, not only about disclosure, but what that actually means to that human being about their sexuality alone. So, and then as these boys grow into men, there's even more shame, more guilt. There's often disruption to, their sexuality, disruption to their ability to sometimes reproduce because of dysfunction. So again, there is one organisation here in Australia called SAMSON, which is a volunteer organisation that actually gives any support to men and boys in that situation. So really hard for men to actually understand and seek help. Also how boys are being raised to not understand how to self-care or care or have permission to care for themselves as well. So, we get down the river and we have the common narrative that men don't seek help or show emotion, typically because they haven't been shown. It's not a biological disposition. That
was actually one of my next questions. There's that long perception men can just deal with their issues, but they remain at high risk in high-risk areas of self-harm and even suicide. And,
yes.
Why does it, you've touched on it, but why does it remain such a problem?
Well, biologically, men are designed to risk their lives to protect, and women are designed to risk their lives to reproduce. And, men are typically high risk taking in their behaviours, typically. So we'll see that men will gravitate into those high risk occupations. And, you go back in time, men pretty much occupy, going to war, going to mines, building cities, building roads, all of those things that often killed men. So male disposability has always been quite a thing that's pretty much acceptable. Off you go to war, you probably, you may or may not return. If you don't, well, you'll just be a hero. So the acceptance that we have that men are disposable, I think still exists to a degree. I think we're getting so much better at valuing men for more than just serving. But I don't think we can discount the fact that, men have this high risk taking behaviour that's required to protect. And, I deal a lot with youth, male youth, and, those periods between, sort of 15 and 25 where we see a lot of high risk taking behaviour, comorbid with drug or substance misuse and things like that, and cars. And it's a really, really vulnerable time. And again, we just tend to judge men and boys for their behaviour rather than do anything about it.
Yeah, we hear and see a lot of money and assistance given to women's groups, which, by the way, is fair enough.
Absolutely.
But how are you changing that focus? Is it like moving the Titanic sometimes, do you feel, or?
It's felt like it up until being recognised for the fact that somebody's been watching. And I think with the OAM, the floodgates that opened of people saying, I have been watching, I've been listening. Somebody actually said, there was a time I used something that you posted for my son who was in trouble. And people won't often speak about their connection through to supporting men's health because they quite often can be shut down or criticised. I actually posted something on the way to the show today. I posted something on LinkedIn, and this is just an example because it came up in my my feed on Facebook, and it's an image, and it says, Valentine's Day. I don't want flowers. Take me to Marrakesh. And you can see there's a picture of a woman beating a man.
Yeah, it's
with flowers.
Nonsensical kind of image.
So I just, I wrote a post saying, trivialising domestic abuse must stop. The world is working hard at reducing the devastating impacts of domestic abuse. So it's only logical to reconsider sharing images like this one that portray violence even in jest. Jokes that normalise aggression, regardless of gender, can desensitise us to the seriousness of domestic violence and reinforce harmful stereotypes. So that's part of that titanic shifting. It's just everyday address to seeing things and not calling them out in a us and them situation, but just reinforcing that we're all in this. Things like domestic abuse affect everybody.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. Clearly, your work can be very confronting. This week, because of this program and the research that's been done, believe me.
Very traumatized.
I've tried to talk to you and you said, look, I can't talk now or I can't come back to you. I'm in the middle of something. You've had someone on the line who's desperately in need of a hand. They're grappling with a whole stack of things, addiction, depression, self-harm or worse. How do you cope with that raw emotion and the psychological toll it exacts on you?
Well, it doesn't have a toll on me because I guess over the years of working in this space, I have to self-care a lot myself. So that's about establishing boundaries for myself. So if I'm dealing with somebody in crisis, I go into automatic mode, not dissimilar to if you worked in accident and emergency at a hospital and you're triaging, that you see some pretty horrific things come in. It's not your job to get all emotional about that. It's your job to jump into action and do your job. And that's essentially what I do. Crisis management is not dissimilar to physical trauma, like a paramedic. So the boundaries around oneself, they'll be built to be able to, I'm very good at compartmentalizing, and I apportion that through to my childhood, where I learned at a very early age to compartmentalize feelings and emotions and also really dig into attributes that I already naturally had of survival.
We will come to that. But one of the things that you've put, and which I, by the way, totally agree with too, is that you've got in one of the many Facebook things and research, Ernest Hemingway said, when people talk, listen completely. Don't be thinking what you're going to say. Is that the key, just not in your space, but when you're finding somebody that needs help, to just being a good listener? Is that, what's the key?
There's more than being a good listener. What's a good listener? Somebody that's there. I always say or think to myself when I'm speaking, because I can get very excited about things and overspeak. In fact, the last interview I did here at 3WBC was terrible because I just overspoke this person. I was so excited. Anyway, but if you think about listening to respond rather listening to react, which is that Ernest Hemingway point, is that if we're listening to react, we've got this catalogue of stuff that we want to address in our head and we're thinking about that. What can I say next? What can I say next? Or I need to have an opinion, or I need to fix, or I need to help. Whereas listening to respond is just opening space. And you don't have to have a response to that. In fact, I was sitting with a client the other day and we sat in silence, complete silence, until something came up for that client. I had to sit there and wait and watch and wait. And Vincent, my dog, was in the room because he's the therapy dog. So he sits and waits as well. And you could see this person, the water was coming up inside them. It was coming. And all of a sudden, all of this stuff came out. And Vincent moved off his beanbag and moved next to this person. And, you know, he and I did our job really well because we were not only listening, we were present, and we were just in the space with.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about Vincent a little later as well, but I love that that's come up. But just getting back to it, you were a key member of the team led by Beyond Blue and PwC that launched a world-first workplace mental health program, Heads Up, in 2014. That really inspired you, didn't it?
Oh, I just got tingles up my back then thinking about how bloody lucky I was to be taken onto that project, because that really set a stage and a foundation to give me credibility, because now, I hadn't really delved into the importance of research before. I mean, I knew about it, of course, but actually working with such a bold research piece and something that was so significant in the time of not only was mental health coming onto the radar of people, but now we're plonking it into the workplace where it's, you know, that's where we really, really needed to see it. And God bless Jeff Kennett. Love or hate him, he's done some really wonderful things, and that's one of them. And he really pushed down doors with that. Yeah,
well, which leads me into so many firsts. Can you share a standout moment that shaped your career or a person and thinking in this area? You've already touched on Jeff, but
I wouldn't say he was. But anyway, that's another thing. Kate Carnell, she was the then CEO of Beyond Blue. And Kate really believed in me as well. And I'm enormously grateful to Kate for not only bringing me on to that program to work in that engagement team, but she also sat me down one day and she asked me if I'd like to be an ambassador for Beyond Blue. And I didn't really know what that meant, because there was only about 5 of them at the time, people going out and speaking about their lived experience. And I'd never taken a stage in that way before. And she really encouraged me, and she helped me build my story. And she pushed me onto a stage. And, that feeling of being believed by somebody like her, and the way she led that organisation. I remember sitting with her with some press one day, and these media people asked her this question. So, Kate, the Beyond Blue thing, it's all about, just really caring, and it's all about mental health. And they were just very smarmy. And Kate turned around and said, "We're here to stop people killing themselves." That's all she said, and I went, wow, I want to be you. And I got a lot of inspiration from that.
Well, that world that stage that she launched you onto became a world stage, because you travelled extensively, local, interstate, even overseas, most recently to London, to be a keynote speaker. What was the primary message there?
Well, I've really I do a lot, guess what, in men's health. So high risk, heavy industry, mostly male workplaces are my sweet spot. So I was speaking about men in the construction industry and what are the risk factors? What are we really looking for in terms of how do we create environments that support good mental health, safety and well-being? So a real focus on kind of some of the things we've already talked about, in that we have to look at what are real risk factors for men. So there's often things that aren't being spoken about at these conferences, and this one in particular, there was a lot of talk about mindfulness.
Right.
And that's about, and all of these and meditation and things that probably typically don't fit in the sector that I work in. There's no time for it. There's no appetite for it. We need quick fixes, in the sense that we need to create really, really strong frameworks of self-care that...
Well, what I really liked, touching on that, something you said that really resonated with me was simply most of the world population spend their waking hours at workplaces. I'm inspired by promoting kindness, care, compassion and respect as a foundation to sustainable governance, policy and process. The life-saving outcomes are immeasurable and the costs are very little. That's it, isn't it?
I can give you a million examples of that. But I think the one that sticks out for me most in why I wrote that piece was I was very lucky to jump on a roadshow with an organisation called Abergaildy, their complex infrastructure here in Australia. And through Mel Pollock, who's the head of health and safety there, we've known each other since the Beyond Blue days, but she brought me in there and I designed, tailored an approach to all of them and literally went out into the field, into the dirt. There was one time I was literally standing on a tree stump speaking to these guys, and I collected data through every presentation all the way up the east coast into central sort of New South Wales, all the way through to New Zealand. We travelled, and the data told me that. And this is from 95% of men that responded. I think I collected maybe 150 data points out of this. Cited kindness and care as the top thing that's important to them. And at least 5 people had indicated suicidal ideation. One even had a note that he showed me. And none of those people died. That blew me away.
Yeah, that's incredible. So how do we differ? Because you have travelled extensively overseas, everywhere, how do we differ here in Australia from overseas, or do we?
Yeah, we are streets ahead.
Right.
Australians should be so proud of what we've achieved here in mental health and the way that we do address men's health. And I do attribute a lot of that to the work of Beyond Blue in those early days. And now, of course, Movember have played a role also in really bringing forward conversations, particularly about men's health. But I think, there's organisations also like Every Mind, who are an organisation who focus on mental health literacy and programs and things like that. So they get us to speak properly about mental health, and they provide programs to the media as well. So if you read any media about, mental health issues or suicide, you'll see it's fairly well designed, and you'll see a common language that's used, and that's thanks to organisations like that. So I think that we do it really, really well. We do a lot of research. Beyond Blue, people that don't understand what Beyond Blue does, it's not a helpline. It's a research organisation, essentially, that creates a whole range of resources to get into the hands of people across a very broad audience. So translated into as many languages as possible. For all the, we live in a very multicultural space here in Australia. So, yeah, doing great work. So, yeah, I think even when I was in London recently, the things that we speak about here, we're so far advanced. Yeah.
You use something called Rogerian theory, if I got that right?
That I studied at university, yes.
Without giving a PhD, what is it? Why is that effective? How does that help?
Well, I know we'll probably talk about it later, but my own experience of mental health challenges and trying to get support as a younger person, I always felt very judged and very pathologized by psychologists. And so when I came to study and get myself a qualification in this space, I didn't want to do psychology. I wanted to do something that was more about people and about how people are feeling without labeling. And Rogerian theory is exactly that. It's all about very person-centered approach. So every person, you're dealing with a person. We're not dealing with labels and diagnosing. I mean, diagnostics and prescription has a really big part to play in keeping people safe and well. It's just not what I want to do.
So it feels a lifetime away now, but what about the impact of COVID-19 and the long-lasting implications of lockdown and isolation? Is that still the trickle effect from that? Assumption is a dangerous thing, but I assume that's still impacting in that space, in your space, or not so much now?
I think there's two sides of it. And depends who you speak to, but you'll hear a lot from kids who were probably in those real formative years of education, particularly the ones transitioning from primary school to high school or in the early years of secondary education, still really affected by that isolation. Then I've got a whole contingent of others who perhaps experience things like social anxiety, who were so incredibly happy during that time and really evolved because they had a sense of confidence and a sense of ability to really emerge parts of themselves, especially in occupation, where they're no longer hobbled by anxiety going into the workplace. They're just free to actually do their job. And there's a whole bunch of other things as well, the way that community really established or re-established during COVID, which is still having some positive effects. I think technology, hands down, has been the greatest adaptation through COVID.
Good or bad?
Great.
Oh,
well, it's opened the world. I mean, people in Mauritius picked me up, and India. I was doing a lot of work in both.
How many languages do you speak?
One, Australian. And I don't know why, but yeah, I just became very popular. But I just thinking the ability to get messages and the ability to communicate. You know, I now have a son who lives in London. You know, the technology, the way that we can communicate. I got a bit worried about him last night because some of my anxiety sits in paranoia that something's going to happen to one of my kids. So I got on Find Me and I could see him at work.
Oh, no.
He was actually, the little dot was just walking back and forward. I thought, there's George, because he walks so fast. And he's just going back and forth at a Rochelle canteen where he's working at the moment.
Oh, we'll talk about family.
Love technology.
And we can jump all. But see, it's interesting, the technology part to me, because depending on who you talk to, it's either God or the devil. And the upside can be so dramatically affected by the downside of a pile-on or someone posting something, and that, you know, everybody's an armchair expert, and you say that whole thing of you would never say something to someone in person that you would say online anonymously. So it's interesting to hear you say that you think it's a fantastic benefit in that space. What advice would you give to people who, not just online, but who are struggling or feeling challenged at the moment? What's the best advice that you could give to anybody listening?
Like, who's challenged just generally by something?
Well, you know, challenged, feelings of, you know, needing support. What's the main thing for them to do initially?
Well, I don't give advice and I don't help. They're two things I don't do, but I do help people make sense of what they do have. So anyone listening in, I'm going to go back to COVID and use that as an example. Pre-COVID, you know, if you're going back to, say, November 2019, nobody got a note in the mail to say, hey, heads up, there's a pandemic coming. Oh, and by the way, that might lock us down for a couple of years. Like that, it's not even in our consciousness that we can even understand what that means. So people who didn't have a plan, who didn't have support plans, fell over, because there was no preparation for it. So I would say to people being challenged currently now, well, I don't know what to do about that because I don't know the situation. But in terms of how we prepare ourselves in life to be responsible, support circles, I call them. So, for example, during that time when I was overseas and got robbed, my support circles straight away, I had a friend in London that I was about to see that day. He turned up. George was with me. He was there. Rory was with me overseas. Rose, oh my gosh, cannot speak more in love with Rose for being over here in Australia and being my man on the ground, or woman in this case. Then I have amazing trades who turned up out of nowhere to help make the house safe. Then I had great insurers who I've got great relationships with, who kicked in and made everything better. So you can see, bang, 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 I had all of these support circles that I'd created that were there for me that activated. So I would say anybody listening in, think about what's in your support circles. It doesn't have to be people. It can be things. You know, where do you go when things go down? Do I go dancing? Do I go driving? Do I, go swimming? Do I go and talk to my neighbour, bake a cake? Whatever it is you do, it needs to be visible for you so you can show other people, this is what I do when things go down.
And what about support networks like Lifeline, Beyond Blue?
Yes. They're not great for everybody. They don't work for everybody. So quite commonly you hear, oh, that's terrible service, never worked. So then what did you do after that? Nothing. Okay, well, then it's your responsibility to maybe have a few other places to go to. And again, we're not all privileged to have big friendship groups or even families to lean upon. However, there's a really, really amazing website here in Australia. It's free. It's called Head to Health. It's got, I was going to say 1 million, but that's probably overstating it. It's got hundreds and hundreds of support pathways, apps, online videos, whatever it might be. Head to Health, just type that in and it should bring it up. But it's a very cool self-management plan that's the Australian government has put a lot of work into.
Yep. Sometimes we overcomplicate. I've read one of the other things you've said, to quote, many of the best and most impactful outcomes require no financial budget, fancy strategy, strict policy, or list of made-up company values. Kindness and care are accessible within most of us, and in your experience, applying these cost-free attributes literally save lives. They're pretty powerful words.
Yeah. Well, who hasn't walked into an organisation or been employed by an organisation who has a mission statement and some values attached to that? And if you go and ask anyone in the organisation, articulate that, tell me ways in which you've brought any of those values to life, probably wouldn't know.
Well, you've worked with... I mean, I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but it seems an opportune time to... One of the things I raised with you was over the course of the journey, you've worked with what some people would call some pretty crusty old white guys in positions of power at different board levels and different things you've done. Has that been an impediment or a help? Or because your response surprised me that you said by and large a lot of them were extremely helpful and helped shape you.
Yeah, because I mean, I have been challenged by people, I guess, in higher positions or not even in higher positions. And I would say I've been more challenged by female directors or superiors than I have been men. But I'll go back to the people thing more so in that, you know, I have been incredibly supported by, you know, I've mentioned Kate Carnell, other people, you know, going back to my very early days of, you know, one of my first jobs was at North Ringwood Fish and Chip Shop.
Damn.
You know, I was 11 and, you know, Mike and Alice, I still remember their names, Nezekin, and they instilled in me such care around really teaching me what is customer service. And I will never forget a lot of those values that they taught me that weren't written on a wall. They weren't in a contract. In fact, working at 11, I don't think it was totally legal at the time. But I think that going through from that, there's been lots and lots of different people. I would say crusty old men, I would get away from that because that's something that I would say, let's not put labels on.
Okay.
On men or anyone for that matter.
I did have actually jumping ahead because you've raised that the Ringwood Fish and Chip Shop. I put here that is the most quintessentially Australian job you could start out with. And you actually said where you learned, according to you, to make a mean hamburger with the lot.
Oh, once I had to make 20 with the lot and it was on a quite a small hot plate and it was a real challenge. And again, it was not an attribute that I was totally aware of that I had, but when I'm set a challenge, I want to do it and I want to do it well. And I remember the way that Mike had taught me to wrap the hamburger in the grease-proof paper so that it didn't fall over and put it into the bag. But I got it done and I was really proud of myself.
Well, look, we probably should go to our music integration, I guess. You've picked Angel by Sarah McLachlan. Tell us about that. What's significant about that and why?
Oh. Yeah, that's, I knew that one was going to come up and, you know, we haven't delved too much into my past, but,
we will after the music track.
Well,
if you're willing.
So we're going to listen to the song before I talk about it?
No, I think I'd like you to tell us a bit about the song first to give us some reference and cues,
Well, there have been quite a few times in my life, but this was a time in my life where I was really, really unsafe. At the time I was grappling with I've got an eating disorder. We haven't spoken about that, but that was in full flight at the time, which really connects into anxiety, depression and suicidality. And back then we weren't talking about where to go for help with any of that. In fact, you just bury it really deep. And that's where alcohol was such a good friend of mine. And this song also talks about, to me, my good relationship with alcohol, which is really unhealthy, but probably the thing that kept me alive. And I went to the doctor. I knew I had to do something, and I just happened upon a doctor called Ronnie, and I won't try and pronounce his surname. And we were sitting there, and I told him what was happening with me because he created space for me, and I felt cared for by him. This is where kindness and care comes in for me. The feeling of being cared for by this man was so palpable because he actually said to me, he said, "You are the most important person in my world right now." And that meant something to me, and I asked him why, and he said, because what's going on for you is so serious. And he believed me. He was probably one of the first people that ever believed the magnitude of my pain and what I wanted to do about that.
Yeah.
And in order for me to articulate to him exactly how I felt was with this song. So I wrote out the lyrics to him by hand, and I gave them to him. And this song, I still play it all the time because it keeps me grounded, and it just makes sense.
Well, how about we play it now?
Thank you.
That is a really beautiful song. It's Angel by Sarah McLachlan, and it summed up a really difficult, interesting part of the life of our special guest. Welcome back. Our special guest today is the wonderful Rae Bonney, founder of this radio program, What Does It Feel Like Being You Today, on 94.1 FM 3WBC. I'm Steve Carey, your guest host. Now, Rae, let's understand the journey from childhood to where you are today, because it's said we are the sum total of our parts, and upbringing is critical to that. So I look back, and in 1968, you were born in a little place called Numurkah on the Goulburn Valley Highway, about 40 kilometres north of Shepparton in Victoria. The population, by the way, in the 2016 census was just 4,768. But at 6 months old, the family moved to Ringwood due to a significant family incident. What do you want to share about that time, and how did it set you up for later life?
Yeah, thank you. I'm now bringing my mind all the way back there, and I really wasn't very conscious there about what was happening. But what I do know is that my dad had a pretty serious car accident, living in Numurkah, and my brother and sister had been born, and that landed him in the Austin Hospital for a significant period of time. From what I understand, it was almost 2 years. It rendered him what they term as an incomplete quadriplegic. So, he's gone from this very active, quintessential Australian good-looking man to being an invalid. So I believe that's why they moved to Melbourne. And I was conceived and born during this period. So I'm a bit of a miracle baby, because from what I understand, given his condition, how he reproduced was pretty amazing. So I feel pretty grateful to have been here. But I can't speak for him. He's now passed away, but I could only imagine that would have been a pretty terrible time in terms of limiting your life and what life looked like ahead for him. But I will say, out of respect to my dad, that what he set up for me is that you can do anything. And with that disability, I don't even like saying the word disability, but he could achieve anything he put his mind to, even with that. So yeah, that's how we landed in Melbourne. And then growing up, I did not fare very well in the environment that was provided there, and which, upon reflection and a lot of research, the family that I was born into was generations and generations of abuse, substance misuse, that went on. And I only discovered this when I went to university and had to put together a genogram, which is like a family tree, but around health. And it really stunned me, how these generations before me, had, and the impact that it has on generations that come after. And I didn't know that at the time, but I think that I was very affected by the generations before me. I'm probably stumbling around a little bit here. Okay. But that involved, from my experience, and this is my experience, various kinds of abuse, including sexual abuse, growing up in that home, and very fortunately, probably due to the people in the fish and chip shop as well, and certainly the people that were employing me during work experience, I was able to leave home and school at a young age.
You left home at 15.
It's around 15,
That's, I mean, people do it, obviously, but for those who do it,
yes,
it must. How challenging was it? How did you survive? How did you manage it?
At the time, it didn't feel hard. Did
it feel like a relief?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think I was equipped to have a feeling like relief back then. I had left school, and I was working at a place called Spectrum Bookshop, which is an educational book shop in Croydon. They're no longer there, but I was doing great work experience there. And when at school they asked me to leave, they said it's probably best that you leave. I was pretty angry at school. I was your textbook bully.
You were a bully.
Yeah. It was pretty bad.
That's interesting.
So what was going on for me at home was causing me a lot of pain and a lot of distress, and I couldn't tell anyone what was happening to me.
Well, you couldn't, but you did have at some stage an outside influence, and that outside influence you've mentioned to me a few times, and we've talked a little bit about, was that legendary AFL Essendon player and one of my former 7 News colleagues, Tim Watson. Expand on that. Because I'll
finish off on the first bit first, so that makes sense. In that the feelings of anger, and I want to talk about this because quite often when we look at that iceberg, we'll see the tip of the iceberg, we'll see behaviour, and we'll assume a lot about a person. So I'm a crazy redhead. I'm running around punching people in the face. I'm extorting money out of people. Anything that I could do to just shift that pain that I was feeling at home. And then, so there was no help for that kind of stuff. But then segueing to Tim Watson, I'll never forget the day, on the front of the Herald Sun, or it was a Sun or whatever it was at the time. He'd arrived from Dimboola. He was only 15 at the time himself. And I just fell in love with him. And I don't know how, because, it's very old school, but I was able to write to him.
Well, you certainly didn't have the ability to text or
no,
back then.
But I would pen these probably quite disturbing letters to him about what's going on for me in life, and he would write back every single time.
It's funny you say that, because that is exactly the Tim Watson that I know.
Yeah.
A very kind, compassionate, and actually gives a damn.
Still does.
And in your life at that point, how did that shift the needle a little bit, if indeed it did?
Well, it didn't shift the needle. It actually just gave me some sense of purpose, and also go back to kindness and care. He was kind, and he cared enough, and he's actually appeared on this show. Yeah. I think I cried my way through most of that interview. But he remembered. Yeah. He said I think a few of those letters got squashed beneath a banana in my gym bag, but he's still incredibly kind.
Yeah.
He already had those attributes inside of him, and I think that, we can all draw on. I think that's where I got the really strong idea that, kindness and care, it's free, it's there, most people have it, and it's really easy just to be kind to somebody, because you have no idea how that's going to impact their life. And so how it impacted my life was, that feeling that I could actually love somebody so vicariously, and probably directly, because I would run out onto the field after every match, and living in Ringwood, Essendon territory, he was often at my school, so I'd be there. I'd wag every class just to be literally running at he drove a Datsun patrol at the time, and I would chase the Datsun patrol up the driveway of the school, and I'd be at his window like, here I am again. He must have just like, oh my God. But again, that's, he really held space for me as much as he could.
And for people listening who, how do you find, or how do you identify a Tim Watson-esque kind of figure? Because I've often said in my life when I've had struggles, I don't need a whole stack of friends. I need one or two really good ones, and maybe just one great one who can help pull me back or do things. Is that another learning that we...
Well, look at Taylor Swift, what she's done for the world.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that she has impacted people in a very similar way. You speak to young girls, young men, older men, ladies. The participation at all of her events last year throughout the world, a testament to she's having a similar kind of impact on people through her lyrics or through her presence. Whatever she's doing is probably providing that for people.
Yeah.
I also had Tiddles as well, my cat. Tiddles was awesome.
Well, the benefit of an animal. I mean, we've already touched on Vincent, the wonder dog.
Yes.
Who goes around with you and helps. And what are you saying? Your quote, or Vincent's quoted as saying he's a mental... He's like a dog with a mental health bone.
That sounds terrible. Let's move on from that, shall we?
Okay. There was the stint at work experience at Spectrum Bookshop before you landed a job at a Collins Street investment bank. Wow. As a typist, but you actually avoided the typing test. That was very clever.
Well, again, not designed, but I think it's something that naturally happens inside of me. If it's a challenge, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it well. I'll find a way around it. And that's not being inauthentic. If I can't do something, I'm not going to attempt brain surgery on you. I'm not going to do that. But
I'm happy to hear it.
If it's in my stable of kind of what I think is ability, I'll do it. So I remember Spectrum Bookshop kind of forced me to leave. They said, you are destined for other things. I'd met my, who was to be my husband, at the bookshop, and again, his family also provided me with something that I'd never experienced before. A beautiful family. Dad's a doctor, mum's a socialite, just a really, really well put together family with proper values, really cool traditions, that to this day, I still practice as part of my, my family traditions as well. So I was really, really lucky to have that. But Spectrum Bookshop, they said, we're either going to sack you or leave, because you have to. You've got to fly. You've got to jump out of this nest of safety. So this job at Capel Court Investment Bank came up, and I went for the interview with the secretary to the chief economist, and she said, can you type? Yeah, I can type, because I did it in school. Didn't mention that I wagged every class and
two-finger typing.
Never replied. So off we went. And in that job, because we were, serving the world in terms of sending out economic research and data every single day. So I'd have to type all the media releases and things like that. But I would work till 10 or 11 at night just to get these things out. And a few months down the track, one of the economists walked past, and I just go like this on really fast on the keyboard to make it sound like I was typing. And he said, "What are you doing?" I went, "Oh, just typing." And he said, "You can't type, can you?" I went, "Oh, no." Anyway, they loved me by that stage because I did a lot of other really cool things, and they sent me on a touch typing course. So to this day, I can still touch type.
That is incredible. And you ended up working with the found yourself the Australian Bankers Association, Dr. John Marsden.
So Dr. John Marsden, he was the real deal. Yeah. And, in retrospect, I reckon way on the spectrum, really difficult man who nobody could work with. So his secretary, like he would churn them. So she only stayed for a matter of probably about 8 months while I was working for her. But in that time, I mean, right from birth, I reckon I knew that, my fascination for the human condition was intense. Anything about human beings I wanted to know. So I'm observing this man and his very difficult behaviour, working out ways around him. So by the time she left, I said to him, I'll be your PA. And they've gone, you're ridiculous, because I was about 17 or 18 at the time, about 17. But no, they couldn't fill the role. So I said, I'll just caretake. And if I'm still doing this, and I've still got the letter at home, and I've written, if I'm still doing this job in 6 months, well, you've got to give me the job. And that's how it turned out. They had to give me the job. So it was an amazing role where I learned about research and I learned about the economy, very up close to people like Paul Keating, who was commonly in my office. So really learning to navigate the world of just a whole different space. Learning how to speak. I was learning a lot of my vocab from the dictionary during those days. I would read the dictionary on the train, learn a new word every day, because I remember doing a research program on capital adequacy. I went, what is that? So I had to learn about that, what that was. And so then he left Capel Court Investment Bank and he took me to National Mutual Royal Bank, where we spent a few years there. And he was the chief economist there. And then he moved to the Australian Bankers Association and he took me there with him as well. So we were together for 7 years. And yeah, it was an incredible experience. I remember he would take me out for lunch for our anniversary. And one year I was getting really cocky because I knew I was in a bit by this stage. I was wearing Country Road. I was great. And he said, where do you want to go? I said, Mietta's. And now Mietta's back then, anyone that lived in Melbourne during the 80s, it was the place to go. So he goes, okay, so we're going. Way out of my depth, right? Cutlery out to here. And this is in the days of that kind of dining. And oh my gosh, I was so nervous. I didn't know what to do. I had to ask the waiter. I said, what do I do with all this stuff? But I got my way through it, but I realised then that I had to start entertaining myself to actually learn what it's all about. But I'll never forget that day at Mietta's. It was both beautiful and terrifying all at once.
Did you learn anything? I mean, I'm jumping forward a little bit, but did you learn anything from all those years and days in banking that set you up for the future? Because you have your own home, you're a successful business person, and we'll delve back into your career. One of the things you're looking at is expanding your portfolio. So how much of that is innate and how much of that did you take from that banking experience and being with a financial economist?
None.
None?
Probably none. None for those purposes.
Right.
The thing I probably learned the most about myself was in those early days, we had a money market downstairs that we overlooked through a mezzanine. And that money market was full of men in the 1980s, which was very misogynistic. It was overwhelming. And whilst I might seem quite confident and outspoken, I also have a big part of me that is an introvert. And so back then I was very, very nervous about all of this. So I'd have to go to the money market downstairs every day and deliver their daily report. And in the early days, I would vomit before I could go. It was so overwhelming, and I had to work out because I had no choice. I really wanted to push through this. So I actually learned how to compartmentalize those feelings and put part of myself away. And it's a part that I use when I get on stage now. It's not that I'm ever terrified, but I become a part of me that does that. And the part of me that's an introvert, I really like that part. And I love being an introvert, and I like being a little bit shy and quite humble about things. You know, like today, there's part of me that's operating in that respect today. So that's what I got from that. But in terms of what you're speaking about, the house and university and things like that, when I was moving it was around the time that I described about the doctor that I visited, and it was part of his recommendation. I found a therapist, and before that, all the therapists I had were just all about wanting to know what happened to me, how long, who did it, should I press charges. It was all anything that only ever served to humiliate and shame me. Mm. I don't know if anyone remembers the Yellow Pages, but I went through the Yellow Pages and I found a guy. I don't even know how I picked him, but his name's Andrew Campbell, and he was one of the he was connected to Odyssey House, so he dealt with the really hardcore people. Anyway, I rang him up and he said, I'm retired, but I told him my story and he said, you sound really interesting. I'll work with you. So we worked out a cash deal, and I sat with him for a couple of years, and he did not work on anything that had happened to me. He worked on everything about me that I could do. So he only focused on my attributes of things that I was, he was collecting all the things I'd done. Like, how did you get this job in the fish and chip shop? How did you do this job at Capel Court? How did you stay with this man, with John Marsden? How did you do all of this? And the reason is because you can. And so from that, he said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, one day I'd love to own a house. One day I would love to go to university. He goes, well, you're doing all of it. And this was a long time before any of those things actually happened. But it built me just a pathway that I could imagine. And I remember then, God bless my cousin Leander. I don't know, you may have met Leander, but there's parts of my family that are really cool, and she's one of them. And she provided me an ability to earn cash. So she allowed me to clean her house. She allowed me to go to work with her. She worked with Parks Victoria at the time, so we'd go and clean toilets and pick up rubbish, and we had so much fun together. It was such a delightful time of life, and I could take the kids with me as well. So Rose and George have really fond memories of being out in many of those places where we were doing all of those things, and hopefully the tax man's not going to come and get me.
I was just about to say.
Long time ago, before tax came in, I think. But I was able to accumulate all of that. So, the home that we live in now is also partly due to Rose and George, who came to work a lot. And there was more houses that I cleaned, as well as having a job. A real job. Yep. Where I paid tax.
Well, one of the jobs, not necessarily chronologically, you tried the 1990s recession, you tried your hand a little bit at acting before you found yourself a marketing role at Orica, became Orica, where you were given a $1 million budget.
Yeah.
Is that right? A $1 million budget to take farmers on a coast trip to Coolum, I think.
Well, yeah.
And I remember coming from Queensland at that time. Coolum, there was literally only that was pretty much it. It was ground zero.
It was Queensland desert, really.
How did that pan out?
Well, it was ICI at the time, Imperial Chemical Industries, and probably one of the best companies I have ever worked for in terms of some of the implementations of strategies and frameworks that they had around how they did business. Anyway, so I had decided to become an actress, as you do.
As you do.
I always wanted to be on stage, and now I am. Look out for the newsreader, the new series I'm in it. Anyway, so as I transitioned into my acting career, that's when the 1990 recession hit. The one that we had to have, I think that was the one. So bottom fell out of that industry, so I had to then get another job. So I joined an agency and they sent me for a temp job at ICI, and that's where I stayed for a while. But yeah, I was working for the marketing area of
$1 million budget, taking a bunch of farmers to the coast.
But they were making a stack of money. Like there was a lot of money in chemicals. This is before we knew about carcinogenics and things like that, or before we were publicising them. A lot of money in it, and the farmers would invest a lot. So key accounts in that area, they're spending gazillions of dollars. So yes, the $1 million budget was probably a drop in the bucket compared to how much money they were making out of it. But yeah, that was a task that was given to me. And again, I went, yeah, I can do that. Don't even know what $1 million is, but we spent it all.
Oh, I'm sure you spent it all.
I had men doing wood chopping exhibitions. I had synchronized swimmers in the pool. It was just insane. And we called it the Cashless Society because back then, again, only credit cards have really just come about. So the farmers would come and their wives, and there was no cash exchanging hands. It was all just done on tab. And it was a terribly posh event. I remember driving around the golf buggy on the golf course at the Hyatt Regency in Coolum. Hadn't even been finished. It was.
I remember.
I think I drove into a pothole. It was.
They still had sugarcane fields in and around at that stage.
But it was an amazing experience to again test myself in something that I really didn't have much of an idea, but I was by myself with it. I didn't, I had no point of reference.
But this is the thing. You rise, it appears to me, you always find a way to rise to the challenge. For example, the work kept coming. Your career took an exciting turn when you secured a role in a media public relations agency specialising in, of all things, yacht racing. And you were the first person to broadcast the Melbourne to Devonport yacht race. You became the first female to report live sports to every radio station in Australia. How did you do that?
Don't know. No, I do know.
If you could please expand for our audience.
Well, that was one of those situations where, I won't go too much into this story, but, a theme to my life, which I didn't cotton on to for a while was, when I described about, generational trauma and abuse, one thing that came out for me was abandonment issues and, some attachment issues, and how I sort of presented into relationships was, very anxiously attached. So that was also attached to a fantasy that I wanted to recreate the Brady Bunch as well. Anyway, so I had an affair with my boss at ICI. He was a very powerful man. Somebody who probably quite matched to me intellectually. I didn't realise that I needed an intellectual match in those days. Anyway, that's a story that I won't go into too much detail, but that ended up being found out. That was all during the Hyatt Regency Coolum thing as well.
Yeah.
So he got seconded to New Zealand, and I was given an option of moving to another department or moving on. So I moved to another department and decided to move on. My reputation was quite sullied. So I looked at this job in media and public relations for yacht racing, went, yeah, want that. I'll have that, thank you. So off I went to the agency, and they said, no, you don't have a degree in PR or marketing. And I said, oh, who needs that? And anyway, so I kept on going back to them saying, has that job been filled yet? No, it hasn't been filled. And this went on for some months, and I was persistent. So just let me sit in front of the owner. Just let me sit in front of the owner. So eventually I wore them down, and they said, okay, you can go and sit with him. So I went and sat with Mike Savey, and like everything, walked out with the job. So he gave me the job on the spot, and I stayed with him for a couple of years.
It was a high-pressure job, right? Oh, you basically burned out towards the end.
Yeah, it was brutal.
Yeah.
In a great way. But again, I'm not taking care of my mental health. Alcohol is, still a key feature of my self-care. Oh, so. Yeah. I imagine all this blue and white perfection. It was very grotty, believe me. But, I'm getting thrown onto yachts at 6:00 in the morning down at Portsea and doing the Portsea Hastings race. So it was a big commitment, but again, learned so much about the media.
So what did you learn? What did you learn from that?
Oh, I learned about the media in terms of making relationships. It was all very relationship based. I don't need to tell you that. But I remember Sandy Roberts was a good friend of mine. Mm-hmm. On Friday afternoons, and you'd ring Sandy because you knew he'd be absolutely trolleyed. You could sell him anything. So always, oh yeah, Ray, we're not that interested in yacht racing really. It's not, it's not front page stuff. It's not even back page stuff.
Well, he was doing sports. So.
That's right. Yeah. So, So that was a really big learning time of my life. Again, stretching my capability, stretching my resilience. And then, did that day when I sat in that media shack down in Devonport. I literally had my feet in the sand, and David Mann, who was then from he was at 3AW at the time, a great mentor of mine, and David is on the sea phone to me, and he said, "You're going to air in like a couple of minutes," and I said, "I don't think I can do it," and he said, "Bad luck," and just hung up the phone.
Wow. Wow.
And then I was live to air, and it was great. It felt so good. I felt like I was flying.
But it did take the toll, and you basically, without putting words in your mouth, you did kind of burn out, right? And And then you decided, which I think is amazing, the next turn is you just buy a one-way ticket to, of all places, Athens, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't know why.
Why?
I don't know. I don't know Athens.
And you just travelled for a while. I mean...
Yeah. Yeah, so I did. I packed up everything, and burnout, like we weren't talking about it then, but it was primarily due to my lack of self-care and not understanding what boundaries I needed to build for myself. So, the one-way ticket to Athens, I don't know what that meant, but I did it anyway, and I landed in Athens, and I looked at the board and went, well, where can I go? And I saw Santorini was the next flight out. And I didn't know how I had the money, because I certainly didn't have a credit card, so I'd paid for all of this myself. And so I jumped on a plane to Santorini. That landed in what was like more barren than than Coolum. And I'm there with my suitcase, with no wheels on it, by the way. And this guy, Voltaire, came, and he was from Portugal. Mm-hmm. Didn't speak much English. He said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Dunno. Don't have any accommodation." And he said something like, "Come and stay with me." So I went, "Okay, I'll just go off with this strange Portuguese man."
Oh my God.
So I went and stayed with him, and we travelled for quite a while together through Greece and through the UK, through to Denmark. We travelled together. Not romantically at all, because I had a love interest at home who was to become Rose and George's dad.
You actually returned home eventually.
I did, but it was an amazing. I pretty much just staggered around the world.
So for people listening, there are two schools of thought. You either charge through the career and do the travel thing later, or you go, to hell with it, I'll do a bit of the career and I'll just go.
Not even.
What did it do for you?
I don't think that was a consideration. That was about running away from home.
Right.
That was definitely, and I would prescribe that to most people. I think running away from home is a great thing. As long as you've got financial, you can do it financially, right, and, you've got some sort of sense about you. But no, certainly there was no plan about life at all back then. I was being guided by my inner spirit horse or something.
So you returned home for a boy who eventually became the father of your first child and daughter, Rose. You then had George, and when he was still a toddler, you suffered a massive health issue. Tell us about that. You had a total colectomy.
Well, I might just skip through a little bit more to bring context to that. Coming home, I'm still in this fantasy land of I just want to make. Well, at that stage, I didn't even really want to have children, but I just knew I wanted to be loved. I wanted to be loved by somebody that was mine. And I had this real perspective of, you're perfect, if only I just change everything about you. That was the way I went into relationships. So, fortunately I partnered with good men, but, in this particular instance, I'm still quite young. And I've got myself into this, and this felt really, really good, because now I had my own space. I had my own home. I had what was now looking like a family to me with him. And then Rose came along unexpectedly. I was on the pill, it was like, oh, well, now I'm having a baby. So that was really, really unexpected. But I remember, I was going to say getting the diagnosis, getting the confirmation. The doctor's going, oh, there's a plus on this. And I'm going, oh, plus must mean negative, whatever. Having a baby. And I remember walking up Little Collins Street going, I'm going to be a mum. And it felt really good.
Yeah.
It actually felt just so natural, which makes sense because I just love being a mother more than anything. And, yes, so that sort of then set the scene for now it's a real family, and now it's real. And that's where my, I guess the behaviours started coming out of me that now I identify as abandonment issues, attachment issues, where I was just terrified being in a relationship but wanted it so badly. So literally, you know, that's where, you know, violence comes into things, that I was pretty aggressive in my relationship, and how I set up scenarios that could have looked pretty terrible from his perspective, but really me. And I talk pretty openly about that now because I understand where it comes from and you can really make sense about it. But, you know, anyone listening in might get it that domestic violence isn't every person's issue. It's very complex. Where it comes from is not as black and white as we narrate it. In my, you know, from my perspective, in my experience, it came from, you know, my own experience of violence and inability to manage my emotions, to regulate emotions, just almost impossible for me to do. And really based on this whole fear of being abandoned, was just something that I just couldn't manage. So, you know, having Rose, I had to move away from there. And so Rose and I lived alone for a year, and then we went back and made George, and then we broke up again. So that sort of, you know, that put me in a much better place being on my own with the kids, because I now no longer had to grapple with this insatiable fear of being abandoned by somebody.
But just to come back to the operation, you were in hospital for nearly 2 months.
Well, that didn't happen till
full on. Right?
Well, I guess once I'd had Rose, then I had George, and then I moved into another place. Yeah. That's when that happened. So and I'm going to feed this back to the abandonment and anxiety and depression. So as a kid, I held all of my grief and my fear and my anxiety in my stomach. You know, people hold it in their neck, in their chest, you know, migraines, backache, neck ache. I held all mine in my stomach for years and years and years. And I still do hold tension there. But how that worked out for my intestine was that it shut down my whole large intestine. It just didn't work anymore. And it took an incredible surgeon, Frank Chen, who still practices at Box Hill. He is a magician. He diagnosed it, which caused me to have my large intestine removed. So anyone that's experiencing any mental health challenges, especially around anxiety, know that it can also have an incredible physical toll on you as well. But yes, so I just wanted to paint
I want you to.
A bit.
It's important. It's important. But so one of the other things you said during the research and what you sent me, you refused help from anyone unless friends as a result.
Yeah.
They felt hopeless, helpless, and rejected.
Yeah. So I in my support network, I had some great neighbours who were living across the road from me. Yeah. And they had kids the same age as mine. So it was a really cool little community that we had, and it was very, very supportive. But when it came to this operation, I was very sick. And, I was in hospital for, I think it was about 2 months.
You lost nearly half your body weight, didn't you?
Yeah, I looked really thin.
Wow.
I didn't look it. I was.
Yeah.
I was really, really thin. But, I think, if I reflect back on, my feelings about relationships that weren't me and my kids that I could control, any other relationships, I think I always held on my terms. So anyone that tried to help me, help would mean I'd be vulnerable. Help would mean that I could be abandoned. So don't wade into that, because once you're vulnerable with somebody, they could leave you. So, so my friends were constantly wanting to help me, and I would just say, no, I'm fine. One time I got to the top floor of Maya at Doncaster, I think, because it was Christmas time, and I always take the kids to see Santa, which was George would start freezing up on the ground floor. So getting him up there was always really hard. But I remember getting up there and just having an episode where I was in such pain I couldn't move. I was laying on one of the beds and they had to escort me out. It was pretty bad. Even then, I would not accept help from my neighbours. And they came to me one day and they said, the way you make us feel is just so, as you said, hopeless and helpless and we just can't be your friend anymore because we just don't want to be around you. And I'll never forget from that day, now I accept help. I don't accept it easily. It is still, frictious for me, but I will always say yes and thank you.
Yeah. You've said to me that I've written down from you, I learned at that time that letting people help is almost as much about their feelings as it is about yours. Mm-hmm. That's true, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And what I've learned over the journey is that if you don't allow people to know that you need help, they just blithely think, okay, there may be some of it, they're fine. Whereas you're actually really desperate for it or needing it, or I know I was. But so letting people in is actually a good thing, but how do you protect yourself from that sometimes? The people who may be overly helpful.
Oh, help is a really dangerous thing. Really dangerous thing. I always check in with myself. Sometimes I might be working with a client where there might be some resonance around my own life, could have to do with my children or something like that. I might be working with somebody similar, and I have to be very careful that I don't go into help mode, because as a mother, I can't be a psychologist to my kids or a counsellor to my kids. I can only be their mum. So I have to be really careful when I start feeling that I want to help, that I stop and I reset. So it's a boundary that I put around myself that I can only be doing my job. And that keeps me safe as well in terms of, I remember way back in the early days of counselling, there was a person who I didn't put up boundaries. I didn't know enough about the kinds of boundaries I needed, and that went under my radar, and that really, really affected me for a while. And I couldn't practice for a good few weeks after that.
It's interesting. The help thing leads us into turning back the dial a little bit. You worked for Black & Decker, found yourself in the midst of the first wave of manufacturing redundancy sweeping Australia. You were also made redundant, which is tough because...
by my best friend too.
Well, it's tough because, it's a time when people are experiencing the absolute lows and everything else, and particularly when it comes from a friend. But that's how I got to meet you the first time, was that I'd left Seven and you were in recruitment. You were working for Hayes then. And I'll never forget coming to your South Bank office, because I was sort of a bit of a lost fish, and I didn't really know what was going on or what was happening or where I was going to go. And I walked in expecting to talk about me, and the first thing I saw was this blackened hand of yours, and it went from being about me to, what are you doing here? Why aren't you at a hospital? I still remember that to this day. You'd been out doing something. Remind me of that.
Trapeze.
But your care for other people, you had a meeting with me. I would have been fine to have said, don't worry about it. But there you were, and I couldn't really get into it because all I was caring about was, please go and see the doctor. Please go and see the doctor. You didn't,
and you probably don't know this, but that feeling of care was important to me because you cared about me. And you only just didn't go, get to the doctor. It was like, hey, this is really serious. But that transition into recruitment was amazing in that, I was made redundant from Black & Decker. Rose was only a baby at the time. And I was, on my own. So it was quite scary. And I remember having an interview with Jill Billings at Hayes, and I was, when they talked about commission, I went, never doing that. And she said to me, if you're half as good as we think you are, you will never have to worry about commission. And do you know what? In my 20 years of recruitment, never once worried about making money. In fact, made enough money that helped me buy a house and do all of that. But, also it put me up close with people. And also helped me build the network that I so rely upon these days. Jenny Thorpe, I think Jenny's listening in today. I met Jenny in those very early years, about 1996, I think it was, when I was at Hayes and she was at Deutsche Bank, and she was a client of mine, hardest client you'll ever imagine. And long story short, we're still friends today, and I think she's listening in today. So that's testament to the network that I've been able to build of people that are still there.
Yeah, because, of course, going through redundancy, it's tough. It's very tough time for people when you lose a job, you're transitioning to other work or have to find employment, whatever. It can be extraordinarily stressful, and that can lead to all issues with mental health and everything else. And when you look at some of the heavy industries that you work in, those areas are going through enormous change. How do you use those skills to manage that side of things?
My own experience of it, or
yeah.
I don't know. I think going back to my own redundancy again, it was just a matter of just pushing forward. There wasn't a question of how I felt about it. It was more what I needed to do about it at the time, because we didn't have the kind of supports that we have now. It's like, here's your check, goodbye. That was it. So now, I work a lot, and if I'm working in a workplace that might be making redundancies, they will have me there on site to capture people, to provide them with an entire service underneath that of support. Not just one thing, but multiple things. So I think we do it a lot better now. It still doesn't take away from redundancy. Always feels personal.
Yeah.
It's, even though it's a business decision, it never feels like that. So that in particular, I think, is something that we are much better at. Again, thanks to heads up from, the Beyond Blue PwC research and subsequent programs. I think that, we're in such a much better place in terms of caring for people and keeping them safe during times of change.
One of the many things I like about you, Rae, is that you can be blunt on occasion when you need to be. And one of your mantras that I love reading in your LinkedIn and socials is to quote, and I won't swear, but be kind, be caring, and don't be an a-hole. That's pretty good advice generally, isn't it?
Oh, but I see it all the time, and quite often I'm brought into situations, and I have literally seen people kill themselves because of this behaviour. I mean, not haven't seen them, but I've had to do work around some of those crisis interventions when people have taken their life. That's because people have just been so thoughtlessly cruel. I don't have to put a finer point on that. Just don't be an asshole.
Yeah.
Really.
Okay. As noted, let's come back to family. I believe having a child is experiencing a love you never knew you had. And I loved reading, must be similar for you, because I love reading recently when Rose turned 30. You wrote, "You are my first true love, and I never forget how your existence gave mine such meaning and purpose." That is just so incredibly powerful. Can you
without crying
articulate that? Well, it doesn't matter if you do, as long as, but how, can you just articulate that? That's so strong, so beautifully said.
I think it has something to do with being loved so unconditionally as well, and you know what that's like with a child. They put their total faith and their whole world is in your hands. And, Rose, it's just amazing how you meet a child that comes out of you and you look at them at 30, they haven't changed. They're the same person. You just didn't know that they were just going to grow into a bigger version of that. And Rose has always been incredibly strong and protective of me. And I remember looking at her after she was born, and she was in the little crib next to my bed, and literally something popped in my chest. And I knew that was love, and I'd never felt it before. And I was just saying to her, it was quite funny, 7 hours later or so, the nurse came around and said, "How's the feeding going?" I said, "The what?" "I've got to feed it." So I'm great in some respects, not so good at the detail. But I was saying to Rose yesterday, in reflection of, we'll talk about Evelyn in a moment, but I remember having Rose and that love for her just being so natural, and when George was coming along, wondering how I was going to find that love for him too. And then they will start me crying as well, because I just go back to saying goodbye to him in London recently. That was just so hard.
Well, of course, he's an international sort of chef, isn't he?
He's a superstar,
he's just smashing it.
Yeah.
But, children are many, many things. They can be frustrating as hell, but as I said, they're a love you never knew you had. And now you've got another generation of that love, which is Evelyn, which is your granddaughter. And I love that you have you recently celebrated your first anniversary of Evelyn and Ra Day. Fun Day. Evelyn and Ra Fun Day. Explain that.
Well, Mondays are the day that Evelyn and I hang out together, and so many times people say, "Oh, so you're babysitting your granddaughter?" I go, "No," and they go, "Oh, what are you doing then?" Well, I said, we just hang out together, like we take care of each other. So when Rose was going back to work, I really wanted to have this experience for Evelyn and I, and just for her and I. So out of my 7-day-a-week occupation, I carved out a day because I knew I could. And that's our day that we adventure. You've been on one of those adventures with us, in fact.
I'm still recovering.
But as she's now, 18 months old, and she's incredibly engaging, and I am so grateful to myself as part of my self-care and my experience of life that I was able to make that happen.
That brings me, it's a beautiful segue. Like, I'll say it from my point of view. To me, you're a force of nature in their lives. And one of those massive achievements is to be sober for 2 years. You recently posted that. You let people know. Why is it important that you changed, or that you were able to make that shift? What does that say about you, but also what's important for generationally your family?
Well, I believe that I was able to dismantle much of the generational trauma that didn't continue on through my creation of family. But alcohol, as I mentioned before, it played a big role in my life in terms of I don't think I would be alive if I didn't use it. I really don't think I would be. For many reasons, in that song we played before indicated. But getting to a stage of life, and I'm not only curious about other human beings, I'm really curious about myself. And as I move through stages of life, I'm really very observant. I'm kind of a social experiment of myself. But I always knew that because my relationship with alcohol was so strong, it was going to be one that I had to approach in a way that it would be a sustainable breakup. It couldn't be just, I'm going to, and I did. I tried quite a few times to give up drinking alcohol. It's never worked. So I had to approach it differently, and that was in a way that I needed to know why. I knew why I drank it, but how to break up the relationship was something different. So I went to science, and thank God for Andrew Huberman. The first thing I listened to was what alcohol does to your brain. And I started getting really fascinated about neuroscience and how it really affects me, and most importantly, what it doesn't do for me. But the next thing I had to do was be safe to sit in my feelings by myself.
One of the things that I've read that really gets you going is, to quote, the thoughtlessness of introducing alcohol to kids at an early age, when you have no idea if alcoholism sits in their genes, waiting to be activated.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, again, we don't know what we don't know, and you know that.
Yep.
But the things that I know now about how, alcoholism is passed down genetically. So, if it's in your genes, literally alcohol is the only substance that can pass through your cells rather than just sit around them like, say, drugs do, certain kinds of drugs. So when it's in you, you pass the genes on. So the reasons we have alcohol laws about, no alcohol until 18, that's not because it's safe for you at 18. You've just got a much better chance of managing the poison and what it does to you at 18. You've got much better decision-making ability than you do when you say 16. So number one, introducing alcohol to kids at 16. Oh, you know, they're allowed to, there's a 2 alcohol, you know, mixed drink limit at parties. Why? What happens if one of those kids has the gene? Once the gene gets activated, it's off and running, and I know it because I've got the gene. So I can't have, I mean, you've seen me yourself. I can't have one drink.
Yeah.
I have to drink all of them. And that's because genetically, that's, you open the lid and you just keep on pouring it in. Whereas other people who don't have the gene, they have 2 drinks and go, oh, I'm done now. So kids that are carrying that gene, what sort of hope do they have? And we see it. I deal with those kids myself who, and the lid's been open and it's like stopping a freight train. So at least stretch it out to a point where at least it could be manageable.
So that brings me
or educate.
Yeah, well, education's always key, isn't it?
Yeah.
But you need money for education.
What, in school?
You? Well, to have programs that can be supportive of people.
Why not make it part of
No, I'm not arguing the toss. I'm just saying, what would you like to see?
That.
Right.
Oh, if I could take all of the money, not all of it, but a lot of the money that is just thrown mindlessly at mental health, I'm using inverted commas here, the gazillions of dollars that are just thrown at that, and take some of that and dump it on new parents to give parents more space, more ability to spend time with their children, educating them, and not having to do 10 jobs just to pay the escalating mortgage rates and electricity bills. I would put money there and also, into education.
Because parental help is a foundational building block of good mental health, isn't it?
Oh, do you know what? People say to me, oh, you're so busy. I just have a lot of interesting things to do all of the time, but I will always find time for my kids, always find space for my kids. So if I'm doing something, if they rang now, I probably wouldn't answer, but I will always pick up for my kids because I want them to always feel like I am there.
That's fantastic. It actually leads into the question that I have is, what challenges have you faced in balancing your career and your personal life?
Not a lot really, in terms of I feel I get everything that I need, but it's an everyday address. Like I have to address not drinking alcohol every day. And that's not because I want to drink alcohol. That's because every day I wake up with all of the feelings, and often I've had nightmares or whatever it is that sits within inside of me. It's not going away. It's there, and I have to speak to it. I have to talk to it. I have to care for it every single day. It's there.
It's not easy, is it?
No. So I go to bed early. I wake up, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. That's the time when I walk and I think and I learn. So I was thinking yesterday about what compromise is, because I would say I compromise a lot of my life in order to care for myself and my family. But the compromise is coupled with joy. If we're compromising that's limiting for ourselves or detrimental to our happiness, that's a different kind of compromise. But I would say I make a lot of compromise. So I don't have an intimate relationship with anybody because I just don't think it fits with me. Would I love to have one? Absolutely. But am I aware of my limitations? Yes, I am. So probably that's a place where it's not a priority for me. Socializing, I don't do a lot of. Probably I should do more. However,
is that because of the threat of alcohol, or you're rock solid that?
As I said, alcohol isn't a problem for me as much as sedating the feelings that I have.
Right.
If that makes sense. And people will always go back to the not drinking thing, but it's about the feelings and it's about the experiences and the trauma that I live with that is always there.
Does it annoy you that, the social world that we live in, with digital media and influencers dispensing, I'll use quotes, free advice? Does that get under your skin when you see some people dishing out, mental health advice, if they're, say, a wag, or does everybody have a right to say whatever the hell they want?
I think everyone has a right to say what they want, but, something that I learned from you all those years ago was how we consume information. It's our responsibility how we consume. And we have to be getting our information from a whole range of sources to make sense of it. So I think, I'll go back to Every Mind. I mentioned that organisation before who does amazing work in really establishing proper language and literature. That is, it's constantly researched, it's updated. We don't always get it right, but it's a really good place to go so we can have a really good, get away from the whole conflation and catastrophizing of mental health to bring it back to some really simple things. And, my statement of what does it feel like being you today, that's a really kind of quantifying statement that I make because it's all about the feeling, not about trying.
No. I didn't mean to cut you off. I was actually going to just say, most people wouldn't know the backstory of how you came up with that tag.
I love that story.
Was jumping on a plane. Tell us about. You love that story, so tell us about that.
I do, because I really there's a woman involved in this, but it was probably in about 2014, and I was travelling to a place called Griffith, which is
we know Griffith.
Chickens and it's a pretty interesting place. And then I was getting on a very small plane in a very big electrical storm to go and speak to men in gas and electricity infrastructure with Gemina. And so I wasn't all that jazzed about this. So I'm getting on the plane. There was a mum and a dad and 2 kids who were getting on with me, and the kids were really, really amped up, and the parents were fussing around. And I said to the parents, hey, let the kids sit next to me on the flight because it's only an hour and you have a chill at the back. They were flat out, they didn't want to engage with me at all. Fair enough. So we get on the plane and I sat next to the mum and one of the kids, and this kid is getting more and more agitated. And the mum handed him an iPad and he took it and didn't have any headphones. And so he's kicking off about that. And I said, look, I've got some headphones, have mine. So she just snatched them. She didn't say thank you or anything, but that was cool. That's not about me. So we got airborne and the seatbelt light went on or off, whatever it does. And she turned to me and she said, oh, sorry about just before. She said, my son, he's only 8 years old. He has Tourette's, borderline personality disorder, ADHD. What this kid didn't have is not in the DSM. Anyway, I went, oh, wow. I said, what is that like being his mum? And she said, it's not so bad. You just caught him on a day when he's not all that great. And then she said to me, do you know much about mental health? And I chose that moment. I had a Beyond Blue wristband on. I put my hand down. I went, not really. I said, but I do live with chronic depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts, blah, blah, blah. And I told her this. And that's when she asked me the question that changed my life. She said, what does it feel like being you? And in that moment, I'll never forget thinking in my entire professional or personal life, and all the therapy that I've ever had, nobody's ever asked me what it feels like being me, as opposed to what have you got, how long is it happening for, what medication are you taking, when are you going to recover? Like I said before, all those things only ever serve to shame me even more. Then I started telling this woman what it feels like being me. And I realised I'd never said it to myself, ever. So I told her, and when I got to my motel room in Griffith, because there aren't hotels there, I thought I'm not going out, and I wrote my first self-management plan. And that self-management plan gets rolled out every single day to so many people, and, the amount of lives that one saved is incredible. So that woman, I really hope one day she's in the audience. She'll know it's her.
She might be listening.
Yeah, hopefully.
What would you say to her?
Thank you.
That's strong. Central to your practice are 3 core values. Congruence, which is genuineness, unconditional positive regard, non-judgmental acceptance, and empathetic understanding. How important is it these days, where we seem to be in such a fast-paced life? Everything just seems to be moving so quickly. I said to some people after I suffered a significant loss that time is the one thing that once you give it, it's one of those rare things you can't get it back. So you've really got to spend your time carefully and give that time to the people that maybe need it. How do you see time and what you're doing with the fast pace of life and the challenges that brings?
I've gotten away from seeing time, really, unless you're on a radio show and you've only got 2 hours. But I tend to look at space. Mm. Space is something that we run around in. Time is something that's limiting. And in terms of when you talk about the fast pace of life now, I look towards evolution, and I get so really, really jazzed about evolution and what it looks like. And we have the whole dippy down, technology, it's going to, AI is going to make everyone a cheat and stuff. It's like, oh my God, this is the beautiful part of how we're evolving. This is what we're supposed to do. We F up 80% and we fix 20 at all times. In that theory, it's always exciting about how we're going to fix something. So I think, yes, we run fast. But if we go back to that, listen to respond, don't listen to react, all of those things, those key themes, and create space for people. Don't say, hey, I've got 5 minutes for you. Just create space and listen with that real intensity. And if you can't, just go, I don't have any space for you right now. But go and see Rae, or go and see Steve, or Inika, go and see them. It doesn't have to be you. It can be something else. And that's why I say help is really dangerous. Help generally comes from people who have some deficiency inside them and have this need to help others. It's like, helping the homeless. Just need to help out. Did you know that I gave a homeless person a sandwich the other day? Well, how do you know that they even like sandwiches? Just because they're homeless doesn't mean they don't have taste, or they don't have, choice in things. You're just imposing what you want on somebody. And it sort of goes back to, therapists from my past who were just imposing methodologies on top of me. Like, you need to do CBT and you need to take some medication. Like, you're not even listening to me, let alone believing me.
And yet you've said, listening to you is very instructive because it's exciting. You embracing the future and all that comes with it. And you've said, and I quote again, an eternal fascination with the human condition and its kaleidoscopic nature has led me to where I am today, feeling a strong sense of gratitude that ignites my curiosity and gnawing appetite for learning, observing, and making safe spaces for people. So what would you say if you saw somebody in need, or what's the first question that springs to mind? Is it I have no experience in that? I kind of do that every day. When you say, if you happen to see somebody in need, it's sort of like, well, that's every moment of my life. But I know what you mean by that. I was just generically
just being cocky. It's always about the whole observation. Trust your gut first. Think about your gut. Something's not right. Something doesn't feel right. There's something that's changed. I'm always looking for change. What's different, or what doesn't make sense? So it's not about a line of questioning. You tell me you're not right. Like, most people that come to therapy for me will go, oh, I'm going through this crisis at the moment and it's really terrible. By the time you walk out of there, you're talking about something completely different, because I'm putting all the patterns and things together that don't make sense, reflecting that back to a person. So I can't even remember what your exact question was.
Well, the exact question was, if you walked out, say you walked out and you saw a homeless person, rather than ask them, do they want a sandwich? What's the thing that you would do first?
How would I know that they were homeless?
Well, that's an excellent question. I would assume, again, somebody in a street sitting on as I saw in Collins Street years ago, with a dog and a tent saying, I'm homeless, help me, or feed me, or whatever. Okay. So
let's learn not to assume anything. I think that's a really good guide. Don't assume. It's like that iceberg analogy. What you see at the tip, great. Don't even. So that homeless person that you've described could have been filming a documentary, and they could have been an actor. You don't know that. So we don't know. So if you wanted to find out about that person, be curious. I always say, be curious before you assume things. So curiosity might have you say to that person, I'm really interested to know what's going on in your day to day.
Because one of the stats that terrified me was you're dedicated to helping identify opportunities for better men's support and understanding, because 2 in 3 Australians who die from preventable causes are male.
Yeah.
That's an horrific statistic.
Well, you think about suicide, 75% of all suicides in the world are men. Workplace deaths, a good 96% of workplace deaths are men. 96%.
Yeah.
Military deaths, exactly the same. Heart disease, pretty much all men. So they're all preventable. So the work that we're doing in workplace around health, safety and well-being all wraps in together now. Before we were segregating, going physical health and mental health were two different things, and we're only just getting there now. And through the work of myself and people like Mike Hagan, who I think is listening in today. Mike's been on the show a few times. He does amazing work in bringing, say, I'm just going to say this simplistically, compliance and mental health together. You know, compliance is all rule-based and mental health is all a bit swami, but he brings it together in a way that is incredibly palatable and also useful in workplaces. So,
what I know when I asked you this question for the lead-up, you were a little bit cagey, and I said, well, what does the future hold? And you said there are things that you may or may not be able to talk about, but where do you see? Are you the kind of person that projects a year, 5 years, 10 years into the future, or are you more a person that goes, this is what I'm doing now? How does Rae Bonney OAM manage that future self and that future path?
Probably not dissimilarly to the way I've always done it, which is through a bit of gut instinct. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting because we can tie all the way back to the OAM piece. And I spoke to you not that long ago and said, hey, I'm wading into the property investment market. Yeah. And that was really cool because I'm exploring what retirement looks like for me. Retirement doesn't look like me finishing work. It's just working on my terms. I thought that would be a great thing. Anyway, that kind of wasn't going down the path I expected. After the OAM, I received a text message from somebody that actually blew my mind in that I was terrified. So it was somebody from my past who instills all of those feelings up for me. So in this one moment, I'm sitting in my bed and I'm just feeling like a child again. I'm terrified. I'm upset. I just don't know where to put all of these feelings. And, you know, part of my go-to plan for when things used to be alcohol, now it's not. So I rang Rose and I talked through this period together. And so I was able to sleep on that. And, you know, I got up in the morning and I felt quite angry about this person pushing into my life to ride on the coattails of my award. And then that took me to another place of what was I scared of? Why am I scared? Why am I still scared of this person? And the answer was, well, I shouldn't be. And then I also sat with a mentor of mine who's helping me, and he was talking to me more about how to build some more passive income into my career and, you know, investing in a few other things. And as I got down the trajectory of that and also this experience that I was in the middle of, I came to the conclusion that I needed to invest in myself. That was the investment that I wanted to make. That was the one that felt most natural. And, you know, Jenny again, listening in, Jenny probably back, you know, a good 30 years ago said, when are you going to write this book? When are you going to write this book? And I do have the book. It's all ready to go. But I have a fear of it because of that person that texted me. What happens if that person read it? That's always held me back. And now I've gone, I've got to let that go. So I let that go. And now I have a business plan. I've got a strategic plan. I have a framework. So I'm heading towards writing my book.
That is absolutely fantastic. And it would be scary. How will you manage that process? Because I would think that any author writing anything that's personal, it's difficult. What do you put in? What do you leave out? Well,
the framework that I've made protects me. It's all got boundaries for me. It's all very, like the show today is respectful. It's not about he did, she did, blaming, none of that. It's all about my experience and what I've learned from it and what I do with it, and how I help evolution change these things.
That's exactly right, because one of the things I'd written down in preparation for this was what you said your worldview about relationships, and I quote, "I don't find that blaming others to be useful or dwelling on things that happened at a certain time and a place of our personal evolution should or could be seen as anything more than a development thing, and we should be taking notice of that." Is that just notice for you, or is that notice for all of us, do you think?
Well, I guess people could adopt the same philosophy. Certainly for me it is, and it always hasn't been. You know, in my early days, I very much felt like a victim of my circumstances, and I lived like that, and I identified with that, and I don't identify with that anymore, purely because it's not useful for me. It doesn't help me evolve. I would not be sitting here today. We never even talked how I got onto radio. But that's another thing, because I know that we're...
Well, please do.
I think we've got...
We've got a couple of minutes.
We still have to talk about...
Oh, yes, I've got that all built in.
But we only have 5 minutes.
Oh, 5 minutes will do. Radio.
Well, we have to be off air at 12 because Paula Hogg's on her way.
We're chewing through 30 seconds, Rae. How did you get onto radio?
30 seconds. Well, this radio at 3WBC, the very late and great Ken Lyons, who I would have to mention, big part of my life as well, who passed away just a couple of years ago at the grand old age of 98. I was men's health, and community is very important to me, and I put a word out to the local politician to say, hey, we need to address this in our community. This is about 10 years ago, and he said if I got up and spoke about that in Parliament, Rae, I would be shot down. So I thought, where can I go next? Radio. So I contacted my local radio station, which is 3WBC, and said, hey, what about this? And they said, you've got to talk to Ken Lyons, because he ran a show called His Health. And that's where that beautiful relationship happened. So Fantastic. I guested on Ken's show, and they said, you sound pretty good. Want a show?
Rae Bonney, OAM, I cannot thank you enough for sharing your journey. It's been an eye-opener and will have helped those listening who may be experiencing their own issues. Coming up next week on your program, you've got Eric Thompson, better known as Dave Rafter from Pack to the Rafters, who'll be talking about mental health in the entertainment industry. But before we go, you are very insistent, and I understand why. Tell us about your last song choice, which is Barnsley's Driving Wheels, and who that's dedicated to and that person's influence on your life.
Well, where do I even start? Chris Smith, happy birthday to you, because it is his birthday today, and he's not here to celebrate it because unfortunately he passed away during the festive season. And I met Chris quite a few years ago at a place called Norman Carriers, who are a client of mine, amazing client of mine, and I do all their mental health work down there. And Chris was in a position, very senior position in the organisation, and needed to transition pretty much. Most organisations would just say, see you later, and not even think about dignity or pride or anything like that. We talk about redundancy kind of situations. The organisation really wanted to invest in Chris transitioning properly from this business. So I had the enormous privilege of sitting with Chris and listening to his story and how he got there, and just how his life was currently being impacted negatively. His relationship with his wife, with his son, with his home life just wasn't great. And long story short, we were able to transition Chris out of the business into what he really, really, really loved, which is driving trucks. That's what he loved. I even had the privilege of spending a day in the life of a truckie with Chris. And it was one of my most favourite days. We did, we drove up to Ballarat, collected some grain, went back to the wharves, and the whole process of what it really was like for being a truckie. His love for his wife, his love for his son, just so intense. And now he was living this life. And then he moved the whole family up to Queensland, and he would ring me from time to time just to say hello. And not many people just ring me to say hello. They'll go, hello, by the way, I need something. And he would say, I'm just calling to say hello. And that's who Chris was, a generous, fun-loving, jocular, connecting person. And, you know, on Friday nights, he's always winning the meat raffle up in Queensland. And so this is for him, and also his wife, Kath, who I'm going to be catching up with later at Chris's birthday party. That's happening today. And wow, the human condition never fails to astound me, watching Kath move through her grief with her son Will and Chris's son, just every day celebrating his life through photographs on social media, and yeah, just amazing. So I can't wait to see her later.
Beautifully said. Let's take it out with that song.
And thank you, Steve Carey, for you.
It's been my pleasure.
Here it is, Driving Wheels, Jimmy Barr.